Hi, I'm Sara Lomax. I'm president and CEO of WURD Radio and co-founder and president of URL Media. And I'm here with my partner, my business partner and co-founder of URL, Mitra Kalita, who is also the publisher of Epicenter NYC. And we have the great fortune of having a conversation with Geeta Gandbhir, who is an amazing filmmaker. She is the brains and the heart behind The Perfect Neighbor, which is a heart wrenching documentary about the killing of Ajike Owens in 2023 in Ocala, Florida, and using almost exclusively police body cam footage and other kind of camera footage from the community. Geeta created this very, very powerful documentary about this tragedy that upended a very tight knit community. And so, Geeta Gandbhir, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. And can we start off with you just giving us your take? It's 2025. You launched this film at Sundance in January of 2025, and now you are. It's gotten a tremendous reception on Netflix. Tell us how you're processing the work that you did and um, where things are right now for you and the film.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that. So we started The Perfect Neighbor about 2 months after Ajika was murdered. There is a personal connection to the story, which is that my husband Nakan Kwantu, his a close family member of his was Ajika's best friend. So when we were on the ground immediately after this happened, but not with the intention of making a film, really with the intention of supporting the family and keeping the story in the news, there was not much coverage of what had happened to Ajika. And that, as you know, without that coverage, oftentimes law enforcement isn't um, isn't motivated to take action. And two, the outcome for the victim and the victim's family can go any which way. So it was important to us, particularly because of the stand your ground laws that exist in Florida and the prior case, we have in, again, everyone must remember this, the Trayvon Martin case, which happened in Florida where the perpetrator walked. We were deeply concerned about the outcome. So we were working with the family and we were shooting some material, but it was really for social media and to share with the news, again, to try to keep the case alive. And about 2 months in, we received the body camera footage from the lawyers. Benjamin Crump came on board. He's an incredible civil rights attorney, and Anthony Thomas, who works with him. They had used the Freedom of Information Act to request all the evidence that the police had in their possession, and it was released and became public record. So we received a thumb drive that had on it all this body camera footage, along with dash cam footage, detective interviews, ring camera footage, and 911 calls. And they asked us to go through it. Anthony was like, "Can you go through this, see what's there? Is it of any use to us or, for the media?" And it came in a jumble. And I couldn't, when my partner, Nakan Kwantu, looked at it and he couldn't believe how much there was. And because usually with body camera footage and the police evidence, it's the night of or the day after. There's it's when they arrive on scene. And that's often, unfortunately, after the crime has happened. And with this, again, there was about 30 hours of material. So I used to be an editor. I strung it out in a timeline, which took me a couple of weeks. And also just figuring out, it was a mystery, right? The chronology, figuring out, because there were multiple police on scene at one time. So we had to synchronize all their cameras. There was a lot of material to go through. And I finally was able to put it in chronological order, like figuring it out. It was both kind of detective work and grief work. We felt really compelled to understand what had happened. because to us it seemed unbelievable that someone would pick up a gun to solve such a trivial dispute, to try to solve a trivial dispute with a neighbor over children playing in a yard next door. And at the end of it, we realized that the footage went back 2 years. And that's when we decided that there might be a film here, that there was more we could do. We got
And
Ajik.
I just want to like make sure if people haven't seen it to that they understand the racial dynamics of this film and this tragedy. That Ajika Owens is a young, I think she was 35-year-old Black woman, mother of four children, and her neighbor, who described herself as the perfect neighbor, um, Susan Lawrence, was a white woman. I think she was in her mid 50s, and so that racial dynamic was, even though it was a very racially diverse community, which I thought was fascinating, um, there was this real uh, challenging dynamic that plays itself out over the course of the film. So I wanted to just put that in there, so if people weren't familiar with it, they understand that that's a big part of what's happening in this film.
It definitely was. And you kind of see with Susan, I think what the footage showed us, and with the lead up to what happened, what we were really able to see is that this beautiful, as you mentioned, multiracial community living together, loving each other, raising kids together, functioning like a family with a strong social network. You had parents who came out, and when the police would show up, as they did multiple times, because Susan called them multiple times, the police, they even saw it. Like the families, one parent said, this one mother said, about the children, the group of children standing there, oh, they're all mine. When the cop said, which one is yours? She said, they're all mine. And she meant it. That, like, even though not one of those kids was actually hers was not there. And there was a father who came out and said, I look after these kids like I look after my own. The children themselves are precocious, confident, polite. They spell out curse words. You see, like, and they're just being kids. They're like the kiddiest kids. Soledad O'Brien says this all the time. These are the kiddiest kids. You cannot adultify them. And so often after crimes happen to Black and brown people, particularly if they're children, they are adultified. We are criminalized. It is impossible to do that. And the police, part of the reason we really wanted to make the film from this, to stick with the police body camera footage, outside of not wanting to go back and re-traumatize the community by, interviewing them and having them relive it, was that we felt that this footage was undeniable. Again, it's police evidence. It wasn't meant to be a film. It was meant to be evidence. And it is just what, again, the police captured. We weren't there. There was no reporter on the ground. There was no film director on the ground, choosing what was filmed, what was not, and, directing people what to say. It was organic, again, and it was just what the police captured when they were in there. And they didn't, I think it was unintentional, but they captured this beautiful community as they were. And you never get to see that, particularly after a crime happens. You never get to see the community as they truly were before, and how this one outlier and her access to a gun, and her, and how she was emboldened by predatory laws like stand your ground, led to this terrible, terrible tragedy and crime.
I'm just going to jump in here. This is Mitra Kalita, the publisher of Epicenter NYC and the co-founder of URL Media, working alongside Sarah, big champion of WURD Radio as well. I actually feel like it's a gift for me, who has been somewhat familiar with your work over the last few years, to see not just that this has taken off, but a lot of themes of your earlier works in some ways come together. And I just wondered if we could talk a little bit about that. What led to this?
Sure.
You had worked on, I believe, some documentary film work around Katrina. I had the pleasure of interviewing you for a short doc you did with Colonel Khalsa, a Sikh man who fought for the right to wear his turban in the U.S. military, which was kind of like a David versus Goliath story, right? And so there was a part of me watching this that wondered, what led to this? What kind of, in the creative lens that you bring, but also You've definitely been in the collisions of people interacting with mainstream systems that don't always include them. This felt like you put a lot of that together. So I just wondered if you could reflect a little bit.
Sure. So I think from my background is in scripted film originally, and I came up with the great Spike Lee and Sam Pollard. So Spike Lee, my first film was Malcolm X, and I think so. My training ground was again with artists, particularly African American artists. I'm so blessed because they took me in, and but with African American artists who would put who again, their whose films and whose work push back against, as you said, systems that are unjust, unfair, not inclusive, who examine sort of both the history and the current day obstacles that marginalized folks in this country face. And I think so. So for me, this film, again, it wasn't. It is. It came to me. Like I did not set out to make a film about this issue. I only know about it because of a family connection, and eventually I would have learned. But again, there was that personal connection, and how it came to me through my through like a beloved family member. But I think that the it absolutely ties in because the again, it has a social justice issue at the heart, which is stand your ground laws, gun violence, and the intersection of racism and and those issues. So I think what you see in the film is how Susan, again, as you mentioned, Sarah, she was actually in her late 50s. She was about 59, I think, when this happened, but how she repeatedly weaponizes her race, her privilege, and victimhood, and she tries, very hard to weaponize the police against the community, and unfortunately, the police who are extremely polite when they show up and they come off as professional, the police bring their own biases to you know to the scene, and they although again they do not show up guns blazing, they are not violent in the sense of like they don't throw people to the ground, they don't shoot anyone, but they never see Susan as a threat. They treat her as a client, and they treat the rest of the community as people who are not worth protecting or don't need protection. They just, and this, even though they are called again and again and again, she successfully weaponizes the things I mentioned before: her race, privilege, victimhood, and they leave the scene doing nothing to intervene in what was happening. And she was using hate speech against children. She was filming them. She was threatening them, and she threw things at them. Like was constantly, she was constantly showing who she was and behaving in a threatening manner. Yet, because of who she was, because of her status in society, nothing was done. And she should have been flagged. Like really, after the third time she called, and there was no crime, it was just sort of unfounded, then she should have been flagged and she should have been warned, and there should have been some sort of action taken, or a community mediator should have been called. But again, the police were not trained for this, and because of the fact that they brought their own biases, the worst outcomes happened, which is that we lost Ajike. She was murdered, and Susan is in prison for the rest of her life,
Yeah.
ostensibly. And I would not wish that on anyone. Like honestly, had there been a proper intervention, that could have been changed. But the police did not protect the community, nor did they protect Susan from herself. And so this is what we're left with.
Yeah.
And we see that through the film and the footage.
I think it's really fascinating, the depiction of the police and the racial dynamics that come through so clearly. And like, we're coming out of an era, like you mentioned, Trayvon Martin, and I think of like Sandra Bland and Tamir Rice, and going back to the 50s, Emmett Till, and how the police and their understanding of Black bodies can be very violent and very brutal. And so that's an interesting element in this film that the police are very calm and polite, and you know, even though everything you said was true, they did not, they totally minimized her as a threat, but they were also, I thought, pretty restrained,
Mhm.
and they were not coming through swinging batons, like taking people's heads off. And so
No.
I thought that that was interesting. And then I thought of the Dylan Roof character who killed the parishioners at um, Mother Emanuel in South Carolina. And it was like a playbook from that, when you see Susan in the interrogation room, and she's just basically lying, and they're like, okay, we'll take you home to get your things, we'll protect you from those violent neighbors of yours. And so you still, to your point, you still see the racism, the systemic racism at play, even though the police officers are not acting in a stereotypically brutal way. And
Correct.
I'm just curious, like in doing this, I it had to be so traumatizing for that community
It
to
was.
go through this. Like, how are the children now? Because again, she had 4 children. She has 4 children.
Yeah.
How are the children? How is that community? Are you still in touch with them?
Absolutely. So the community, basically, we had a screening for them before it aired on Netflix, and we've been in touch with them absolutely, and we have made best efforts to also support them as far as if we got permission from anyone who was heavily featured in the film, because we wanted, we wanted them to know what we were doing, even, and so. We've been in touch, absolutely, and like I said, we had a screening. We wanted them to be prepared, and it was really hard. It was really hard. My producers, Nakan Kwantu and Elisa Payne, went down there for that, and they said that they almost doubted what we were doing at that point. They were like, was this a mistake? Because there was such a visceral reaction. A lot of people had not seen the footage. It caused them to relive that night, watching the film, and they were so close. Like when we talk about, it was like they had lost, their sister, their daughter, their mother. We didn't actually show it to children. It was adults, but some were younger than Ajika. But that just the idea of that was, it was so painful that for a minute, you wonder, you always struggle as a documentary filmmaker, like, or what are we doing here? Is this the right thing? Are we, is this helping? Could we be harming anyone? This is always a question for us, or should be. And I think, but what was so interesting is afterwards, it was they formed a circle to talk about what they had seen, and their feelings about the film. And they said that it was cathartic, and that they understood the purpose of the film, and they felt that it needed to be out in the world, because no other community should have to go through this, no family should. And they feel that they wanted it to be a call to action. So as far as on that street, there's only one family left that lived there.
Oh, wow.
They all left because it was just too
It's too much.
traumatic for them. And I think the children, it stayed, it's up and down, obviously. They've lost their mother. Pamela says that they are the bravest people she knows. They have to, they are grieving, but yet they get up every day, they go to school, they try to carry on with their friends. Like they're young. They were so young. So and they witnessed something terrible. So again, children are incredibly resilient, but there's an open hole where their mother used to be. Nothing replaces her. Nothing replaces her. And she was a engaged, loving, wonderful, bright person. Like just like she was their world. She was a single mother, and did everything for them. So I think it's a unimaginable loss at that age, and particularly in that way. But they have a loving grandmother. They do have, there's a father involved. They have a community. But it's not. It's going to take time. It'll
Yeah.
definitely take time.
And there's a version of those circles, I think, is how this film has landed with the public because, in like groups where I'm texting with friends, people will say, I just saw The Perfect Neighbor, I'm feeling a certain way. So there is this processing beyond the people who've been impacted by it, which is such a testament to the work, Geeta. I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what Sara said about the depiction of police and then how this landed with the children. And some of it, I think, is because it's body cam footage, you're literally in the place of the officer, right? And so there is a walking in someone else's shoes element to this that, depending on your politics, can feel a little bit disruptive. But then also, I wondered if I found myself sympathizing with the police officers because they were being nice or because of that perspective. And so just around I guess the two groups I'm thinking of is, did you worry about being too hard or too soft on law enforcement? Like, what was the line, right? And then for the children, it feels like you took a lot of care with their story. Were there any ethical considerations there that we should be aware of? Those are the two kind of constituencies I'm thinking about right now.
Sure. So as far as police body camera footage, I think we're absolutely aware that it can be used, it is a tool of the state, and it can be used as a violent tool of the state. It's a surveillance tool. It's used to surveil Black and brown and immigrant and LGBTQ communities, right? It can be extremely invasive, and it can be used against us. And I think the one thing that I wanted to do with the body camera footage is subvert its use. Again, it's normally, you might see it used the way that I just mentioned, but we wanted to subvert it and use it instead to humanize this community and to humanize and to show what they were like beforehand, again, which you never see. And as I mentioned before, so often children are adultified. We, as Black and brown people, are criminalized after something happened to us. And I believe by showcasing the community as they were before, it is undeniable that who these folks were, that it was a group of multiracial families raising children, living together, loving each other, and these were kids. You know what I mean? Like, if we did not see this, our thoughts on the case might be different, and so I feel like body camera footage, again, it can be weaponized, but it also can be, it sort of walks the line. It can be weaponized, but it can also be used in ways that are important to showcasing what actually happens to us as people of color. This lead up to the murder showed Susan essentially us like terrorizing this community. And if we didn't know that, we might think differently. Unfortunately, Ajike would have been painted, I believe, as a violent person who was aggressively like harassing this woman, right? But the body camera footage shows us different. So I think that's why it sort of it can help alleviate the bias that society might have around a case. And body camera footage now is only in 8 states. It's required in 8 states. And as you can imagine, powers that be are trying to overturn that. So I do think it's critical that we keep demanding the use of it, because for us, there's another, it's important. There's another film that came out, Incident, that you all might have heard of. And it was, again, similarly, it used, I believe, CCTV footage. And again, tool of surveillance, but it showed the murder of someone. Again, a man who was, and through the, I think it was the carceral system, or it was the police so forgive me, won't need to fact check that. But it showed, and again, it's like how can these tools of surveillance be used? How can we subvert them is my question that I'm asking with this. As far as the police and what they do, I think the behavior of the police meets people where they are. And I think who you are in the world determines how you think about the police. I think if you are a Black or brown person, you might be like, okay, sure, the police were nice, but our bar, as Nikan Kwantu, my partner, says, our bar for the police is so low that we often mistake them being polite for competence.
Totally.
And I think Black and brown folks understand the racial dynamics at play there. I do think if you are from a different, background, you may not see that. You may be like, oh my God, the police are so great. But I think our hope is to spark discussion. Our hope is and again, I think the reason the police body camera footage again, because is we feel we weren't thinking so much about whether or not people would empathize with the police. We were thinking about how immersive it was and what it showcased for the community. The police are just the vehicle to us. They're serving as our camera. Um, and then your second question, I'm sorry, you
About the
asked.
children. And Sarah, I know you and I talked a little bit about kind of that moment, for example, when the
Oof.
children are informed about their mother.
Sure. And so it's been very interesting to us because I think what we see is that people don't react as much to Ajika actually being shot as they do the children's grief. And that becomes the ethical question. And that is really fascinating because to me, it speaks to you about the fact that we are so used to violence that showing violence to audiences isn't seen as unethical or isn't questioned as unethical in the same way that showing the children's grief is. And I totally understand as a filmmaker, and we wrestled with it. This is the worst day of these children's lives, where they are being told by their father, who chose to do it there, but forgive me, by one of, because they're two different fathers, but by one of the fathers shows up and chooses to tell them right there in the moment, and the police witness it. Um, and the cameras caught that. I think what was really interesting is when we made this film, we basically got the blessing of Pamela Dias, Ajika's mother. I went to her and said I could make a film. That's all I know how to do. I have no other skills. Would you want that? I think I could tell Ajika's story, or just the story of this community out of this material. What do you think? Tell me. And she said yes, absolutely. Even though she was, in the midst of blinding grief, she was like, she felt that there needed to be more. She wanted sort of purpose to her pain. So we went away and made the film. She was trying to put her life back together, and came back to her when we were done before Sundance. And I showed it to her. We basically and said, "What do you want to do? We can toss this in the trash. This can just be my therapy process," which it kind of was in a way, making the film. It was my way of processing. And we can, but do you want to proceed with this or not? Or we can take things out. What do you want to do? But I left it, I felt that the grief was important because I felt that it showed you the impact, of what happened in a way that if we had been more sparing about it, I think it lets people off the hook.
Yeah.
And, but again, there's the question of the children, is it, so I left that decision up to her. She watched it. She said it actually made her physically ill, the movie, but then she watched it again. She watched it twice because again, she was learning so much in the process. And she was like, no, I want people to see it. Leave it in. They need to know. This happened to my grandchildren. She was like, I'm raising them. They will understand why I did this. But people need to know, if we're going to make change, people have to bear witness. Why, if they had to go through this, then the world can endure bearing witness. And that was, and she's sort of like a Mamie Till. It's so interesting, Sarah, you mentioned Mamie Till, and that's her inspiration. It was Mamie Till. She was, and as you all know the story, but Mamie Till had an open casket funeral for her son after he was brutally lynched, and had reporters take pictures and circulate them because she wanted the world to know what happened. We do live in a different time, obviously, where unfortunately we see violence against Black bodies on repeat, which is why we chose not to show so much of Ajika, but the children Pamela wanted to show, because she was like, that is, obviously, if we're going to be numb to gun violence and violence against Black bodies, this is also violence against Black bodies. The
Mm.
grief is violence, but we
Yeah.
don't talk about that. We don't talk about the grief. We don't talk about the loss. We don't see our communities as human, or not we, but excuse me, greater society doesn't see our communities as human enough to deserve protection from this. And that was what we saw throughout the film, where Susan was just deemed a nuisance and the kids were told to just stay off her lawn, even though they weren't on her lawn and they had the right to be there. So there was dehumanization throughout this film. And I think she knows how affecting that moment is. Pam does. She knows how hard it hits. And she was like, leave it in,
Yeah.
everyone can take it. So.
Let me just reintroduce you. We're talking with Geeta Gandbhir. She is the director of a very powerful documentary called The Perfect Neighbor. It's on Netflix. I think you're in the running for like the uh, Emmy or
Yes.
Oscar, or
Yeah.
I guess it's Oscar, yeah, for best documentary.
It is
So,
indeed. It is indeed awards season. But for us, honestly, I think the idea of one there's a story that I should tell you, and I'll make it tight, but or I'll make it quick, but that Pam always tells if she's with me, and it's about Ajika. And so this is sort of part of our mission, with the film and through this period. But so Ajika, as I mentioned, and you mentioned, was a beautiful young mother of four. She was 35, but she had, a lot of big dreams beyond, of course, being a mother. She had a lot of big plans for herself and her kids. She wanted a better life for herself. And so she and her mother were very close. They were almost like sisters. Pam had her young. And so they would talk every day and they would speak on the phone. And Pam lived in Atlanta, but Ajika would call her every day and she had some new plan. She wanted to be an entrepreneur and she was going to like be very successful. And so she had all, these dreams and maybe schemes, her mom would say, that she would come up with about what she was going to do. And her mom would laugh at her, as mothers do sometimes. Like she would just think her plans were outrageous, or whatever they were. And one of the last things that Ajika said to her um, was that, and she would say it often, but she remembers one of the last things Ajika said to her is, "Mom, you laugh at me, you laugh, but wait, one day the whole world is going to know my name."
Mm.
mm,
So,
wow.
this is what we are collectively left um, with Ajika, and what her dream was. And so I think for us, the idea of making change in her name, if we can push back against these predatory laws, if we can, again, the film being on a Netflix, which goes out to, which has a global reach, that is our mission. Like we want the world to remember her and to remember her name. And then it hopefully we'll be able to say it one day. We made change, we made the impact that she wanted on the world in her name.
So let me just reintroduce me and Mitra. I'm Sara Lomax. I'm president and CEO of Word Radio and co-founder of URL Media. I'm here with my business partner, Mitra Kalita, who is co-founder of URL Media and president and publisher, rather, of Epicenter NYC. And we're talking with Geeta Gandbhir from The Perfect Neighbor, the director, about this very powerful documentary. So, I mean, I've got so many questions for you, Geeta. My next one, though, is you talk about Ajika's story and her dreams, her aspirations, but we really have no visibility of her personality, her hopes, her dreams. We don't really have insight into her as a person in this film. It's really, and it's because of the body cam footage and the structure of it. But do you have any regrets, or is there any way that you feel her story could have come through in a more profound way aside from the tragedy of her killing?
Yeah. So no, we actually we thought about that. There were times when we thought about putting in interviews, but again, we felt that we wanted this to be um, an observational film, a film that played like a horror film or a thriller.
Mm.
Again, coming from a scripted background, felt that this community lived a true life horror film, and I think the truth is that Ajika could have been anyone. Ajika is, even though she wasn't, obviously she was definitely someone. What is ironic is my relation used to live in the apartment that Ajika, or in that little house that Ajika lived in. And and then she basically, when she moved out, she told Ajika that she should come live here because it's this beautiful community and the kids play and you'll have so much support. And Ajika moved in around the same time Susan moved in, or maybe a little bit before, I believe. But so I think that was part of it, is that we could have centered Ajika fully, but and made a different film. But we wanted to make something. We believed our audience is smart. We believed that the community spoke for Ajike. Her children spoke for Ajike. You see her twice in the film. You see her, talking about the kids, and you see a couple of people did speak about her. She was the mom. She did these things. She all the things she did for her kids. And so you hear some of that in the interviews that come afterwards. There's detective interviews. You hear some of that about her. So we really felt that we wanted to live in that footage, live in that world, create something that felt like a scripted film, and allow the community to speak. Because it was Ajika's story, but it's also the community story. That community function, it was a family story, in my opinion. And I think they are representative. It's sort of, you see in this film sort of the best of our society and the worst of our society. And I think that community is the best, and they all are. That, again, if any one of them had gone across the street that night, the same thing could have happened possibly. So it really, I think that was the decision, not to only, even though it is ultimately Ajike who lost her life, to not focus solely on her story, to not only like centralize her, but to make it a community story was, I think, a decision we made collectively.
Geeta, this is not a film that you kind of turn off and you move on with your life. I mean, it feels like it leaves you feeling a certain way. You want to do something. And you've had some answers to that question. Like if people feel they watch The Perfect Neighbor and they want to act, are there specific organizations or campaigns or something that they can be a part of to do that?
Oh, I'm sorry, my phone reminder. So there absolutely is. So my Pamela Dias, Ajika's mom, and Takima Robinson, who's my relative and executive producer on this film, they started an organization called standinginthegapfund.org. Again, that's standinginthegapfund.org, and people can go there to see what steps they can take. Sort of, we do hope the film is a call to action, and that they have a website that they are basically, their organization that they have created is to support families, and they are doing some work around policy change. So that's a great place to go if you all are interested if anyone is interested in doing more.
I'm curious because the world has changed a lot since January 2025, and when this film came out, and I think Ajika was murdered in 2023, and so we're almost 3 years from when she was killed, and we are seeing so much violence with the National Guard, with ICE raids, with it's a very militarized, and we're kind of living in a police state, even more so than maybe even in 2023. And I'm curious, like, when you reflect on the film, The Perfect Neighbor, and what you created, and the body cam footage, and all of that, and where we are currently in this very different time, how would you have done anything differently? Like, does the message change in any way based on our current reality that we're in?
Yeah. No, not at all. I think so. I think this film actually is a microcosm, that holds a mirror up to the world we live in. What you see in the film is how, again, the intersection of racism and manufactured fear, polarization, and access to guns and predatory laws lead to, a tragedy in a community. But I think this could be, at this point, this community could be anywhere. And I think what this film really shows us is how manufactured fear, which is the tool of an authoritarian governments. Again, I'm going to repeat that. Manufactured fear is the tool of authoritarian governments. It is used to polarize us. It is used to make us believe that the only way that our neighbor, right? Our neighbor is someone who has to be dealt with violence. That is the only outcome. That is the only way that we can manage, again, even a trivial dispute. If we will accept and tolerate that and think that that is acceptable, or just let me say that differently. If we ourselves can be led to believe that using a gun against our neighbor is acceptable to solve a trivial dispute, what else will we accept? What else will we accept because we are fearful, because we are polarized, because our government tells us we should be fearful? What else, that it paves a pathway, right, for the government to do more heinous and hideous things like snatch people off streets, disappear people. It's a pathway to war and genocide. And it's how fascism works, right? That's how fascism works, is it leads us to believe that our neighbors are actually our enemies, and that we have to. And so that Susan repeated, and stand your ground laws are, again, the fundamental basis of stand your ground laws, and they exist in some shape, form, or fashion in 38 states in this country, is that if you fear that you are in imminent danger of your life, you have the right to defend yourself without the duty to retreat. There's that term, fear. And that is what is being used. It's a tool that's being used by us, and I think, but against us and our communities. So I feel that this film, unfortunately, is even more relevant, because how we show up in our neighborhoods for our immediate community is the first step to how we show up in the world and who we are. So if we're going to terrorize our neighbors and believe, Susan came into that community functioning like a colonizer. She came into that community believing that everyone had to bend to her will. And then she tried to use the police, to weaponize the police to make that true. So I think.
But there, I mean, I did see some comments of people who were saying, they understood her sentiments. I mean, I think that, did you get any of that? Oh, sorry.
I think this is going to spark conversation, and we welcome all of it, but yeah, I do think we are in a place where some of us are already there, or are already in a, polarized, are already feel that we have the right to, again, that the right to pick up a gun against our neighbors, against the person who lives next door. We've seen that again, but stand your ground laws embolden that, and there shouldn't be a loophole. Like, I mean, we have the case of Joden Dunn, right? What you remember, his music was too loud, and in the car, basically there's so many cases, but stand your ground should not be a tool that is, again, weaponized. And particularly when Black and brown people are murdered, unfortunately, by someone who is not, then the self-defense claim is more successful. You could always in this country claim self-defense, right? There's no need for this additional layer of a predatory law. So this is, I think, the point that we're trying to make. But yeah, we feel that the film absolutely still remains as relevant, if not, unfortunately, more so, because you see that, again, how one outlier and their access to a gun, and them being emboldened and be feeling that they would have because of the powers that be too, that they would be in the right, for what they're doing, that they would be seen. Susan was so confident that she would get off. She didn't even get a lawyer.
That's right.
Wow.
She was so confident that her defense was going to work. You see her in that room twice.
Yeah.
Never asked for a lawyer.
But I think there are other, and I'm going to let you jump in, Mitra, but I think you also see the elements of mental health issues, class issues, as well as racial dynamics in this film. All of those things are kind of there. They intersect in powerful ways.
They intersect. Now, I want to say one thing, because we want to be very careful about the mental health. A lot of people bring up mental health. Now, Susan was thoroughly evaluated, and they did not find anything that was pertinent to the case regarding mental health. She was, so as you see, the judge said you did this more out of anger than fear.
Mhm.
right? The fact that she, again, sort of plotted this, it took 2 minutes for her to kill Ajika. Mental health is often, seen as, it's often sort of called upon, like it's brought up. But I just want to make sure that we point out that the majority of people, who are afflicted by any kind of mental illness harm no one, right? They harm no one. So often, and mental illness is quickly stigmatized. Like to point to Susan and say, oh, she was mentally ill. Like, I want to be careful because that is not what was found to be true, at least, if there is any sort of mental illness that she has, it was not the reason that she did what she did. And that's what was found in a court of law.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure, because mentally ill people,
Yeah.
again, deserve protection, as
Sure.
well.
Thank you for clarifying that. Go ahead, Mitra.
Well, I was just going to say the framework of the perfect neighbor is so apt for what Sarah's alluding to with kind of the police state and ICE and the militarization that we're in right now. And, at Epicenter, we've really tried to use the word neighbor and neighborhoods to our obligation to
Community.
people right now, to community. And we often resort to like kind of more clinical terms like residents or citizens or even immigrants, as though they're those of us who are neighbors and then there are immigrants as somehow different. And so I appreciate the reflection on what is our obligation to our neighbors right now. I know we have to wrap up. URL Media was founded 5 years ago. Obviously, I'm Indian American, South Asian, was raised in Puerto Rico. Sarah is African American. We believe and represent solidarity and coalition building in a moment that I think there's a question mark over that. And so I just ask you, as a South Asian director who took on a film about the treatment of Black bodies, what your reflections are, both within your own role and also whether that solidarity, remains intact in this moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that solidarity and coalition building remains more critical than ever to our survival. And I think, as just in general, with what we're facing, as you said, it is a police state. We are in an authoritarian government that we're dealing with right now. So the way that we are able to push back, fight back, survive, and thrive is through coalition building. For me, and again, my mentors, who have been so generous to me, and the community that took me in as a filmmaker is the African American community. So I stand on the shoulders of folks like Spike Lee and Sam Pollard. And so for me, it is not lost on me that, who I am in this world. I probably would not have made this film or chosen to make this film if it wasn't for the family connection. Honestly, my partner is African American, so it is his family that brought this film to us, meaning my partner, my husband, Nakan too. And the film came to us through his family. It was very critical to me that I have people on this film who were deeply creatively involved as well, being my husband, who's a producer on this, Takima Robinson, my relative, his relative, who is a sister to me, but also is an executive producer, Sam Pollard, and Elisa Payne. So they all have, I feel, working in collaboration with them was critical to holding me responsible, holding me accountable, and making sure that the integrity, authenticity, and ethics of this film were what they needed to be. So I think, and then Pamela Dias also. Again, we do not see her, even though she did not have anything to do with the actual making of the film. She is a collaborator. This is hers as well. And so I think that we would never have done this without the permission of the family. So I think it's that connection is what led us to make, and myself. So I also have a company, Message Pictures, and Message Pictures is Sam Pollard, myself, and Elisa Payne, and we work with Nakan, my partner. The other people I must mention who came on board too to support is Soledad O'Brien, who is Afro-Latina, and her producing partner, Rose, who is Latina. So we really tried to build a team that looks like what America actually looks like. Like representation is critical to us. And we also, our editor, Viri Deanna Lieberman is LGBTQ. And so we tried to make sure we had a representation from across the board, which is something too that is under attack, right, in our world and outside. But so that people could weigh in and, you know, tell us their perspectives and make sure that we were telling us a universal story, a story. And it was critical to us that this reach a global audience because of Ajike's, you know, because of what Ajike had wanted. So, and it should never have been this way. She should still be with us, but in her absence, it feels like what we could do to, you know, for her and her legacy. So that I think that is as far as the making of the film. And I'm not going to lie, it was grief work. Like we also did it as grief work, you know, and like I said, had Pamela Dias said no, you know, this shelve it would be shelved. It was really her wishes. But I think we have to, sorry, we have to finish, right? Forgive me, I'm going on.
No. That's no problem. I just wanted to see if you could give the Standing in the Gap Fund.org, if you could give that resource that people can contribute or where can people go to learn more about that work? And obviously people can watch The Perfect Neighbor on Netflix, but if there are any other resources about how to support your work or to support the family, can you just share that with us?
Sure. So standinginthe.gap.fund.org is the best place to go currently to find out more about what you can do to support families. They are doing work around supporting families impacted by race-based violence and gun violence, and they are also doing policy work. So standinginthe.gap.fund.org is the best place to
Excellent.
go.
Thank you so much. We've been talking with Geeta Gandbhir. I'm Sara Lomax, President and CEO of WURD, co-founder of URL Media, and Mitra.
Mitra Kalita, publisher of Epicenter NYC and co-founder of URL Media.
And Geeta, thank you so much for your work, for
Thank
your heart, for all that you are contributing to make this world that is kind of upside down right now a little bit better. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.